The Coventry University Friedrich Ebert Stiftung and the Kenya Indigenous Youth Network, in collaboration with the Ministry of Environment, Climate Change and Forestry through the Climate Change Directorate, organized a 2-day workshop on strengthening youth participation for inclusive climate and carbon market policy frameworks. The workshop was held at the Amana View Hotel in Nakuru on the 4th and 5th of February 2026. The workshop brought together 30 youth leaders from Nakuru, Baringo, Laikipia, Nairobi, Samburu, West Pokot, Narok, Trans Nzoia, and Isiolo counties.
I was really drawn to this particular group of participants, the marginalized youth or the indigenous youth in Kenya, because as I was doing my fieldwork, I came to realize that they lacked a lot of knowledge when it came to understanding the policy, climate policy, and the spaces within which they can influence and participate. So they expressed a desire to know more, and particularly in the space where carbon markets are really emerging within the climate policy space in Kenya, and with the recent developments, I saw this as a good opportunity to bring the youth together so that they can engage with the policymakers and see what opportunities do they have for engagement. And based on their understanding of the current policy landscapes, they can also give their input.
So on this, the issue of how far we are on matters of climate action and the carbon market in terms of the policy. Already the ministry has completed the several phases of the policy framework. One, when we amended the Act, and in section 23, it talks about carbon market. Then we have finalized the carbon market regulation in 2020, last year, I think 2024. And also now we have several drafts. Among them, it is carbon market trading. Then we have vertical and market. And also we have carbon registry regulation that they are now in the last phase in the office of the Attorney General, so for further processing.
FES came in to support the work that the Ministry of Environment, Forestry and Climate Change has been doing to engage actors within the carbon market space, and we identified a gap in the capacities for the ministry to support youth engagement and capacities on carbon markets. So when such partners approached us, we came in to collaborate to help support indigenous youth communities to build their capacities and to help them understand what carbon markets are, what they mean for their communities, and how they can plug in.
One of the sessions that we had was on policy at the global and national level, and I think this is a very important session for us since we are able to know how the different dynamics when policy frameworks affect indigenous peoples. And for us, this is the beginning of a conversation that we keep going on and interacting with to advance advocacy for indigenous peoples organization and indigenous peoples territories when it comes to carbon markets and carbon markets regulations, benefit sharing, grievance redress, etc.
The workshop targeted marginalized youth because they live in regions where most carbon offset projects are implemented. These young people also face historical exclusion from policy processes, yet, in the context of climate change, they are uniquely positioned as custodians of traditional ecological knowledge.
I'm really glad we're having this discussion at such a pivotal juncture in our advocacy career, where the youths, especially the indigenous youths, are able to formulate a position in which they want the climate and carbon credits policies to be in place. Why is this important for us as the indigenous youths? It's really important because, as you all know, in our culture, the custodians of knowledge are the elder people. So even when the government wants to come and implement anything, they only look for the older people. So we as the young people are really in much need of seeing and understanding this policy, because this policy is not ending today. It is a work for the future. And who are the future? Us as the youths. This is really important, and it came at a really good time, because right now most of our youths are now informed. They've gone to school, they've cleared their degrees, and right now being involved in these policy-making processes is very important to ensure that their voices is well put and well written on paper in the final policy document.
The workshop aimed to equip youth with the tools and knowledge needed to understand climate change policies, carbon markets, and REDD+ programs, what they are, how they operate globally, and the roles played by national governments. Carbon markets and reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation are global approaches designed to help slow down climate change. The basic idea is to encourage countries, companies, and communities to protect the environment and reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Last 2 days, we have been discussing on carbon markets and climate regulations, and looked at the landscape as Indigenous people, and today developed an IP Indigenous Youth policy paper on carbon markets. And it's very important, especially when we were discussing issues of assets. We identified some of the assets in our lands, in our counties, that cut across land, water, forests as the major carbon assets that are in our communities. And we identified some of the challenges with that is that most of the time you realize that communities, this information gap within the communities. Communities are not aware about these carbon projects, even their rights to these projects and to these assets.
Carbon markets operate by allowing countries or companies that reduce emissions or protect forests that absorb carbon to earn carbon credits. These credits can then be sold to others who need them to balance out or offset their own emissions. This system was developed as part of international climate agreements, such as the Kyoto Protocol, to help reduce total global emissions. Many young people, particularly those from marginalized Indigenous communities, lack the technical knowledge required to engage effectively in climate policy spaces. On day one of the workshop, the focus was on building their capacity by strengthening their foundational understanding of national climate policies, including carbon market policy frameworks and governance structures in Kenya.
So this workshop is necessary because it helps to capacity build the youth so that they can understand the climate policy knowledge and what currently exists. From my fieldwork, the youth shared that they lacked that technical expertise, and that acted as a barrier to their meaningful inclusion and also participation in these policy landscapes and processes. So this workshop is necessary to, first of all, capacity build the youth in this space. And also, the carbon policy framework is also in development in Kenya, and this is going to continue to evolve. So it's important that the youth understand what currently exists, what pathways there are for their engagement, and what influence they can have within that space.
Participants also learned about different pathways for youth engagement in climate policy processes. Many expressed hope to participate more actively going forward, recognizing that climate policies should reflect the voices and priorities of grassroots communities.
My key takeaway in this session for today's program is I have learned the importance of public participation, and that the youth's voices, the women voices, the PWD's voices are very important in the policy making. And going back to my community, I will ensure to be able to inform them on how important their voices are in this policy making, because they're the ones who are most affected by climate and all this peace security.
I'd say my big takeaway today is how poorly designed carbon credit projects can accelerate violations against Indigenous peoples, especially violations on land tenure and violations on consent.
And the most interactive session today has been the session on carbon markets, where we've been able to learn about carbon markets, methodologies, developers, and how communities and young people can best engage in carbon markets.
On day 2, the workshop focused on the co-creation of a youth-led position paper on carbon markets. Here, they shared their views on what an inclusive, community-centered, and equitable carbon policy framework should look like. Going forward, there are concrete action plans they proposed that should be followed through with the Ministry of Environment, Climate Change, and Forestry to ensure that their perspectives are included in climate policy making with government and partners.